Clients ask me a lot about certification and statements of conformance. And so, what this comes down to is for us to issue documentation, your digital asset for the given scope must be fully conformant with a given version and conformance level of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And there are no exceptions here. So, let's take an example. Let's say the digital asset is a website and the desired scope is 10 pages. So for those 10 pages, there can be no instances of non-conformance with a given version and conformance level of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So let's use WCAG 2.1 AA. There are 50 success criteria. All 10 of those pages must be fully conformant with all 50 success criteria. And so I'm currently on the screen with me is the understanding conformance page from the W3C. And then we have the section titled Understanding Conformance Requirements. And underneath that, it reads, there are 5 requirements that must be met in order for content to be classified as conforming to WCAG 2.0. And then underneath that, we have 5 different sections outlining 5 requirements. But the key takeaway here is that for us to make a conformance claim, which really gets at the conformance statement and the certification, we are bound by these requirements because a statement of conformance is a construct of the W3C. So we need to follow their rules. And similarly with accessible.org certification, the only way the certification has any weight is if we follow these technical standards, because the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are the standards for digital accessibility. So they really are the only relevant technical standards. So we must follow these for the documentation to carry weight. So really, the two documents have significant overlap, but that's not the point here. The point here is that to have a statement of conformance, to have certification, you have to meet all of the requirements in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and there are no exceptions. So I'm going to scroll down this page, and we're just scrolling past the 5 requirements here for a conformance claim. And then we have a section titled Understanding Conformance Claims. And underneath it, it reads, it is not required to make any conformance claim in order to conform. If one does make a claim, however, the rules must be followed. And then so continuing on down a little further, we have a section, partial conformance claims due to third-party content. And this has come up recently. So let's read through this section. When an author makes a decision to use a third-party implementation, they should choose products that meet WCAG requirements. If all content on a page, including third-party content, meets all WCAG success criteria, then the page conforms to WCAG. So this is the optimal situation, is where even though we have third-party embeds or third-party integrations, everything is still conformant. And that is why we as website owners, or we as procurement agents or buyers, are seeking out products that are conformant with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines so that we can maintain conformance even though we are relying upon third-party integrations. But let's continue on with this paragraph. However, if the page does not conform to WCAG only for reasons that are legitimately outside the author's control, then the author can make a claim of partial conformance. It is important to recognize that this is a statement of non-conformance, and there are users who may not be able to access some of the content this page. And I think that's supposed to read on this page. But the point here is that you can still get documentation that speaks to your conformance with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but the W3C provides really this affordance for instances of non-conformance which are completely outside of your control. So a statement of partial conformance is still compelling documentation that really speaks to your accessibility and investment in accessibility, and just acknowledges that, yes, while there may be some accessibility, or while there are some accessibility issues, these accessibility issues are outside of your control. And so here we have a statement of partial conformance, but as this last sentence reads and as it states, this is a statement of non-conformance. So you're basically saying we're non-conformant with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but this is the reason why. This is third-party content that is outside of our control. So continuing on to the second paragraph, it reads, one reason that content may be outside the author's control is because it is being provided by a third party. And then it has here blogs, portals, news sites. Web pages may also include content via third party libraries, plugins, or widgets. And then there's one last paragraph that reads, be sure to monitor any content that can change without approval from the web page author, as a page which once conformed may suddenly fail to conform. If it is not possible to monitor and repair the third-party content, it is necessary to identify the non-conforming parts of the page for users. If the rest of the web page conforms to WCAG, such as a page that qualifies for a statement of partial conformance, third-party content. So that's the document that can be relied upon and provided for if there's a fully conforming page other than the third-party content. So this is something that I was recently talking to someone about, and I wanted to bring this up because it is a question. I still think a statement of partial conformance is compelling documentation. When you use it and how you use it is going to depend on your situation. And you have to, one other thing to remember is that just because a digital asset, let's say it's a screen or a page of a given digital asset, doesn't fully conform with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it doesn't mean that the page is inaccessible. It just means that there is a technical instance of nonconformance, but it doesn't mean that the page or the product is completely inaccessible. And you see this in play in the marketplace when ACRs are being provided, and you might know ACRs better as VPATs. So when an accessibility conformance report is provided to a procurement agent, the procurement agent is going to evaluate the ACR, and just because there are instances of nonconformance with a technical standard, it doesn't mean that the product is going to be rejected by the procurement agent. It just means that there are certain accessibility issues that exist. And so again, just because there's a non-conforming page or a non-conforming digital asset, it doesn't mean that it's inaccessible. It just means that there is a technical instance. There's an instance where the digital asset doesn't technically meet all criteria in this case for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines technical standard. So this is really an overview of conformance statements and making conformance claims. If you do make a claim of conformance, then you have to go back to the governing body for conformance claims here, and that would be the W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative. And so I will link to this page on understanding conformance that is provided by the W3C. But these are the requirements that we have to follow. And there are 5 requirements, but they all get at ensuring that a page is fully conformant with a given version and conformance level of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And so one other thought here is if there are certain success criteria that you cannot meet in a given version, then you can also work backwards. You can work down a version of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and still potentially get a conformance statement for the earlier version. So let's say you don't meet a success criterion in 2.2, then you would work down and you could potentially still get a conformance statement or certification for 2.1. You just wouldn't have 2.2 in there because you wouldn't meet that version. So these are some of the things to think about as you are working through accessibility documentation. Of course, the ideal is to work through any third-party integrations. And if you are relying upon an integration that is not going to be accessible or is unlikely to make any changes anytime soon, then that's when you start looking for alternatives, or just eliminating that content from, let's say, your website altogether. But if you are reliant upon the integration and the integration does not technically conform to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, a statement of partial conformance is still available. So if you are looking for documentation of accessibility, accessible.org provides not only statements of conformance and statements of partial conformance, but if you are fully conformant, we can also issue our own provider certification. And then there is also separate documentation, and this is where we get into VPATs and ACRs. This isn't certification, but it is standardized documentation that really amounts to an accounting of the accessibility status of your digital product or service. So the point is, accessible.org can help you with documentation. If you would like to learn more, I will include relevant links to accessible.org in the description.